Hey friends, it's Jess with Virtually Visual. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and if you're coming back, welcome back. It's been a minute since my last tutorial. I've been super busy, so I'm so sorry that it's been such a long time. But today I just wanted to do a somewhat easy tutorial on these kind of organic liquid kind of shapes with these particles stuck to them. This is mainly just kind of an overview of the stick modifier that you can throw onto your particles. It's super cool. It's hard to tell in still images, but I'll have the wireframe animation here on the screen just because I haven't rendered out the full one yet. But basically with this modifier, you can have particles stick to modified and animated objects. So they kind of follow that same animation. So if you have something you want kind of like bubbles on, or just normal particles, or, you know, custom objects that you can use as particles, this is a really great feature to utilize for that. Also, just a reminder that I have a Gumroad shop where you can either buy or download for free some fun 3D resources. If that's something you're interested in, definitely check that out. It'll be linked down below. And again, some of those are free, so even if you're not sure about committing to like a paid resource, you can definitely download the free ones and just explore those first. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive right in. Okay, so I have on screen here the two renders that I had from my original project. These are just different colored backgrounds, and I think I have a little bit more subsurface in this render on the particles than in this one, so they look a little bit more opaque here. And I'm going to try to just recreate that. You could totally use whatever shapes you want. I just went with a torus, just randomly. There wasn't much thought there, but as you guys know, I like to start off with one of the backdrop objects, which you can find by clicking the cube and then coming down here to backdrop. And I threw a dome light in. I just hid it for the moment, but it is, let's go to the asset browser. It's this third one down that I chose. So it's got like a small above light on the right, and then it looks like a square softbox on the left. First things first, pretty obviously, we're gonna pull in a torus shape, and let's change that to positive Z axis and bring that up. And then I'm gonna scale this down. I probably also for the tutorial may just show you one of the toruses, since it's the same process for the smaller second one. Let's kind of change our orientation here. So I'm just going to kind of be looking straight on. And what we're going to do, let's hit N on our keyboard and then B so we can see the lines. I'm going to take the segments all the way up to 200 and 100. So 200 for the ring segments, 100 for pipe segments. So it's somewhat of a dense mesh there. And then we're going to go down to the, oh, sorry, wrong thing. We're going to go to the modifiers here, and we're going to do the displacement, or the displacer, and we're going to drag that onto our torus. And let's also hit NA on our keyboard again, so we get rid of the lines. And inside this displacer, make sure you're in the shading tab, and we're going to go to the shader little drop down, and you're going to hit noise. And you're going to get this lovely little result. I think that's kind of fun, just as is. But if you, also, this is not something they really say, but you may hit this and you're like, oh, I can't customize the noise. You can. They don't describe it, but you just have to click on the image of the noise, and then you have all these properties. So main thing here to know is that you can turn on animation, which is nice. So I'm going to put the animation speed to like 0.2, and then I think loop period something like 20. I don't really understand how to make it loop here, actually. I assumed at first that this was frames, but it is not. So I'll have to research that, but I think this should be somewhat slow, so let's just preview. Yeah, might even be too slow. Let's also increase our frames to like 150, and let's do 0.3 or 4 for the speed. Go crazy and do 0.5. Yeah, I think that's cool. So, and then we can also change the noise type. I think noise as is kind of nice. It's smooth, but it's a little bit boring. I like FBM, but obviously you get this craziness here, very jagged. So if it's too jagged, let me move my panel up here so you can see this, my stupid activate Windows message blocking things. If you take the contrast of the noise down, it will not be quite so intense. If you were doing a donut, maybe we don't want FBM, but we could also take the global scale up to like 500, and then that's much less jagged, so that's kind of nice. But let's try a few others just to experiment. Okay, so I think that's kind of interesting. Let's just say we're happy with that. We've got our torus all set. So the next part is pretty obvious. We're going to be adding our particles. First things first, go up to simulate emitters, and we're going to do a mesh emitter. And then go into the emission tab, and you're going to drag in your torus. And we'll worry about restriction later, but for now, let's just leave this as is. We don't want constant, we just want a shot because we don't want bubbles constantly coming up. We just want to have them there on the surface moving with the torus. So let's do like 10,000 to be extreme. And by default, you'll see particles shooting off. So we don't want that. So for one, we can go into properties and we can turn off the velocity. But there's a couple things we need to do for the particles to stick to the torus. Let's go up to simulate. We're going to go to modifier, and we're going to add collide first and drag that into your particle group. And then we're going to go back to simulate modifier, and you're going to find stick, and you're going to also drag that into the particle group. One thing to note, for collide to work, you do need to also have a collider tag on your object. If we don't do that, they will not stick to the torus. So go to your torus and right click and go to simulation tags and collider. And I'm just going to set this to both, and I'm going to turn off bounce and friction, and I'm going to turn up stick all the way just to help the particles even further. And then on stick, leave that as is. In collide, we can turn off the bounce. We don't really need that. And let's just preview what we're working with now. So as you can see, voila, we are essentially done with the effect. The particles are now moving with the mesh. So that is really the essentials. But there's a couple things we're going to want to do. Let's say we don't want the particles on the entire object. I didn't have them on my whole torus in my renders, so how would we go about doing that? If you click on your torus shape or whatever object you're using, and I believe it's other tags, you can add a polygon selection. And then in here, make sure you have the section for fields, and we're going to add a shader field. And unlike vertex maps, I don't really like that you can't visualize what is being affected in the same way. Shader field for a vertex map, they would show you the colors, the red and the yellow that you might be used to. But here, even if we add a shader field, you don't see it. So that is kind of annoying. But regardless, we're going to add a noise for our shader field in the vertex or the polygon selection tag. And then let's click in here. Let's take this global scale to like 350 or 400. Let's change the noise. Let's do FBM, and let's take the contrast up, and maybe even the brightness down a little, something like this. And what we're going to do now is, if you click on your mesh emitter again and go back to the emission tab, there's this restriction section, and we can just drag our polygon selection right in there. It won't show up right away if you're like in the middle of your timeline. You have to go back to the start and then hit play. But now our particles are restricted to just those areas. So people have used this to do like mold on fruits, but regardless, that is kind of how we get the polygons the particles just to a specific spot on our shape. Let's take a look at changing some materials on here. Let's go to Redshift Render View. Let's drag this over, dock it next to our side here. I'm also going to go into my render settings and change my aspect ratio. I have a preset, so I'm going to load that, but you can change your render settings, but I will show you mine. So I'm actually going to change this to only 1920 by 2304. It's a very random number. And then in Redshift and Advanced, I have the threshold set to 0.1. I do have denoising on. And to get extra sharpness, I like to change the filter to Lanxos. I don't know how to say that. And the filter size to 6. And then by default, you're always going to want to change the secondary engine to brute force. We don't need caustics unless you're doing like bubbles. And in system, make sure you turn your memory down to 60 here instead of 90. And I'm also going to take my bucket size up to 256. I have an NVIDIA 3060 Ti graphic card, actually 2 of them for 8 gigabytes. And I think I can handle that, but if your machine can't, then just keep it on 128. Okay, I think that's all for render settings we need to know. Let's add a camera. And let's go in the camera. And then we're going to set the focal length to either 85 or 120. You can also hear that dog barking. Once we've zoomed that in a little, let's zoom in more on our shape. And I'm going to angle us to the side a little here, just so that with our dome light, we get a little bit more of an interesting just look to the contrast. And let's hit preview. Cool. So that is what we're working with so far. I am going to rotate our dome light in the H value. I think it's thinking -1 something. Yeah, I think that was it. So I think in my other renders I did like -100. So we've got this slight angle to the light. I just liked how that looked. But you may be like, okay, I hate the green default particles. I hear you. Let's change that. If you click on your particle group and right click, add a redshift object render tag. And we're going to change the particle mode from disabled to optimize spheres. And then leave everything here as is. Don't need to mess with that anymore. But let's actually go to the mesh emitter. And if you go to properties, you can actually add some variance to the size. So by default, it's 1 and 0. I think it's more interesting if you do 0 for the radius and then 1 for variance. It will vary the particle size between 0 and 1. But again, it won't change anything if you're in the middle of your timeline, so you have to restart and then hit play. And now they will be more various, so you can see that. So in my other render, I had like 4 particle groups because I really wanted some variety. Okay, actually, I had 2 particle groups per torus. So let's just worry about adding a second one. To just get some more variety in the particles, I just added another one that was smaller particle size. So I think if we put our mesh emitter and our particle group inside of a null, whoops, and then if we duplicate that null, and let's also rename the particle group to like particle group 2 and mesh emitter 2, and let's name our nulls. So these will be smaller particles, and this one will be larger particles. And I'm going to go to the mesh emitter and change the color just so we can see the difference. And I'm going to change the variance from 1.2 to maybe 0.6. So those will be smaller. Let's just see if it adds that. Yep. So one thing you may notice though, we've got smaller particles and maybe you want them in the same spot as the other ones. But if you don't, what you could do is add a new shader field or a new polygon selection with its own shader field. So let's just do that for the sake of the tutorial. We're going to duplicate the polygon selection. Make sure you rename this. I'm just going to do polygon selection 2 because I'm lazy. And let's go into the fields. Let's delete the old shader field and add a new one. Same process as before. Change this to noise. Change the scale. Change the contrast, and let's change the noise type and take down the brightness a little. Okay, let's just see now. Oh, and we also probably want to change the seed, just random. Okay, oh, and one more thing we got to do is go back to the emission tab in our emitter and change the polygon selection to polygon selection 2. So now when we replay it, they will be in different spots. So perfect. You can see that that worked. We've got different particle sizes, which is great. We've got our torus animating and the particles are following that shape. And we can just take another look at that again here. And as you can see, the particles are following that. So perfect. We've got everything set up. But one thing I do want to change is obviously the look we have going. Let's create some materials. Okay, first one is just going to be our torus. And then I'm just going to hold down Control and drag to make a copy. I'm going to say particles. So So for our torus, to kind of do the same thing I did in my preview images, I'm going to make this kind of a liquidy, milky color. So I'm gonna drag this kind of into the red area and then bring in some yellow. And I'm gonna drag the subsurface all the way up and drag this onto our torus. And then particles, I'm gonna do same kind of thing. But I'm gonna change the scale to 0.5 and make sure you drag the particle materials onto your particle groups. Oh wait, sorry, not onto the nulls. Make sure you drag it onto the particle groups themselves. And then let's refresh. And let's hit preview. And voila, you're pretty much where you need to be. But you may have noticed in my render that I had some variety going on in the coloring on the torus, so I'll just show you that. I actually used an image texture that I made in Midjourney AI, I think, or I used a max on noise, which I'll just do a max on noise for the sake of this tutorial and staying redshift related. Let's do a max on noise and pull in a ramp and drag the little pick whip thing onto the ramp and hit general input, alt input, and then drag that into color and drag it again into subsurface color. And then let's do our ramp first so we have the right coloring. Double click on the endpoint, set it to like an orange, bring this all the way up, and then bring it back a little so it's a little desaturated, and then keep that on white. And then we're gonna go into the max on noise. If you solo it, you'll see what the scale is kind of like. Actually, reference it more in the IPR because sometimes these are different. So it's pretty small. Let's change the scale first to like 100. Let's see what that's like. Okay. And then let's change this to, maybe we want to try Ober. That would be kind of interesting. So that's kind of cool, but let's do 500 for the scale. So if we unsolo this, let's take a peek. So I think that's kind of interesting. And if it's too colorful, you could do a couple things. You could either take the subsurface up, like the scale, up to like 2. That will wash it out a little bit and just let light penetrate it a little bit more. Or you could keep it at 1 and you could just desaturate this orange a little bit more and brighten it up. And then there you go, a little bit more of a milky orange kind of shampoo commercial color. So let's say that we're good with that. Then, okay, so that's essentially the basics of the shaders and the materials, and I think things look really nice. However, I do want you to know that when you have a scene with active particle groups, as in you have an emitter and the simulation itself is still taking place in the scene, your render is going to take more time and it will be a heavier file overall. So I've showed this before, but a way to kind of speed up your performance is to cache the particles and then only load that alembic file for the particle group. So there is actually a tab for cache where you can hit cache mode and then just load the alembic. So you don't have to have the emitter in here at all. So I'm going to do that and show you guys how that looks. And this will just save you some performance time and yeah, some hassle on your machine. So let's first cache our particles. Cache object, and I'm going to choose a spot where I want to cache that. So I have a folder actually for my particle caches. So I'm going to save that out as like particle group 1. So if you don't have too many particles, that should work out fine. But you know, we started with 10,000 particles for both of our emitters. So this is running pretty fast to cache. So yeah, the new particle system is really fun in that way. It makes almost real-time creation a much more fun process. Okay, so that is particle group 1 and done. And let's do the second one. Okay, so my caches are done. It just resets the timeline to 0 by default. So let's click in. It'll play much faster, and obviously you can see our particles are there, but we haven't replaced anything yet. So it's gonna feel scary, but trust me, this is fine to do. What you're gonna do is you're gonna actually delete your particle nulls now. So just hit delete, delete. So we just have our torus, and let's pause our IPR just for now. So what you're gonna do now is go to simulate, groups and just add a particle group and duplicate that again. So we'll call this particles large and particles small, and go to the cache tab, click cache mode, and then you're going to locate those cache files you made. So make sure you remember what folder you saved them to. Okay, so when you load them and you preview, you're just going to have the particle colors like we did before. But again, all you need to just do, click on both particle groups or caches, go to render tags, add your redshift object again and change that to optimize spheres, and then just drag your material you made for the particles onto those groups. And we are back to where we were before. So now it just runs much smoother, or it should. They're cached, so they're going to play faster anyhow. You don't have to be simulating anything real time. And this also means that if you need to do any other kinds of simulations with the toruses and the particles, you're only loading an Alembic file now for those particles. So it's kind of handy. You can just mess with more after the fact. But again, that means you have to be happy with your particle settings. So we can't go back now and change this. Only do this method of caching and loading the particles as alembics when you are totally satisfied with what they look like. The kind of nice thing is, because we are using the optimize spheres in the redshift render tag, you can use the scale multiplier and still affect the size. So I could change this to like 0.1. This is our larger particles, and they'll be super small. So yeah, that's just kind of a nice little feature, and it's still all cached and follows movement. Let me think here. If you want to make some like bubbles, like if you're maybe like, I would like to try some like glass or bubble type of thing where I have like condensation on a can or bubbles on some animated object, just make a new redshift standard material. I'm just going to call this bubbles, and let's change the color to white and bring our transmission all the way up and our roughness on the reflection down, and then just replace our particle materials with that. And I'm not going to keep this permanently, but you'll just see what that looks like. So there is some also weirdness here with some of the reflections, and I think that would go away if you just change the transparency in the render settings. Just up that number a bit, give it some more samples. But I'm not going to stick with bubbles. But again, if you wanted to do a bubble focused render, you could do that. Perfect. Back to normal. And yeah, then this essentially is the spot where we would just render that out. So I'm going to add some lights to kind of make this a little bit more interesting. Totally up to you how you want to customize your scene. But that was the basics of how you get these sticky particles that, you know, follow your actual animation. That's kind of it. So I'm going to go to our main camera again, and I'm going to just render this out for this tutorial. And I'm just going to do the still image, but again, this whole thing was kind of about how the stick feature enables particles to stick to your animated objects. So super nice. Feel free to render out your own animations. I'd love to see what you guys are coming up with. I have a lot of things I'm excited to share moving forward. So stay tuned for more tutorials, and always feel free to leave requests. I'm super happy to make things that you guys feel are helpful and exciting and fun. And yeah, I hope you stick around. So I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.